Hey guys, Adam Burns here, bringing it to you today on how I turned a $100,000 investment into a $3 million property. It all started back in 2015 when I had a friend come to me who had $100,000 that he wanted to invest in real estate. And he saw some of the early successes that I was having and wanted to team up. This is actually the first time that I took on outside investment for any of my real estate development. My friend and I, with the help of an attorney, put together what's called an operating agreement, which outlined the agreed upon terms of our relationship. The agreement was that I would contribute 100% of the blood, sweat, and tears needed to permit, build, and then lease out the property, and he would contribute 100% of the cash or equity required for the deal. We ended up making an offer on a small rundown garage in East Boston, contingent on permitting 2 units on the site, meaning our offer to purchase was stipulated that we had to have those 2 units permitted in order to close on the deal. My friend contributed his $100,000 of equity as soon as we had tied up the property or had it under contract, and I proceeded to hire the architect and go through the permitting process. After about a year of permitting, we were ultimately successful in getting our building permit to build the 2 units that we were after. With the permit in hand, we closed on the property in 2016 and began construction shortly after. We were able to purchase the land at the time for only $155,000. We ended up partnering with a local lender who was able to give us 75% of the purchase price plus 100% of the total construction costs for the property, which ended up being about $450,000. So doing the quick math, we had to bring less than $40,000 of cash or equity to the closing table, and the loan ended up being somewhere around $550,000. Over the course of a construction deal like this, the developer is required to pay all the operating costs of the property throughout the construction period. That includes all of the interest to the bank and other things like taxes and insurance. When you're early on in your development career, don't be surprised if the bank asks that you open what's called an interest carry account. This is an account where you place all of the interest that could be earned on the total loan throughout the construction period into an account with the lender who's giving you the loan. That way they can pull the interest payments from that account on their due date each month. This does reduce the risk for the lender dramatically, but it also increases the amount of upfront cash that you need to bring to the deal. So between the money that we put down at closing, about $40,000 give or take, and other fees and expenses at the closing table, plus those operating costs that I was just talking about, that $100,000 investment went pretty quick. Another year later, when all was said and done and the property was leased out, we were into the project for about $600,000 total. We are also generating revenue per year of about $66,000. We happily rented out the property for just shy of 4 years, collecting a nice return on our initial investment. By 2020, we had just over $250,000 of equity that had built up in the property due to the appreciation of the area around. At that time, due to the appreciation of the building and some other considerations, my friend and I had decided that it was time to sell. Now, we didn't want to sell and pay capital gains tax, so we decided to do what is called a like-kind exchange, or a 1031 exchange, and buy another building. A like-kind exchange, or a 1031 exchange, is a method by which you can sell one asset and purchase another asset while deferring the capital gains that you would have paid on selling that first asset until you sell the second asset at a later time. Now, this concept is important in real estate because it means that we can take all of the money or all of the equity in that first property and use all of that equity to purchase the second property, rather than paying capital gains and having some of our buying power taken away from us. We ended up selling the building in February of 2020 for $880,000 just before COVID really hit. When we made the sale, we had already identified our replacement property, or the new property, in another emerging submarket of Boston. Unfortunately, that deal ended up falling through and we were forced back to square one. Well, everything happens for a reason, and we actually ended up finding another great property here in South Boston close to our office, a 4-unit brownstone ready for renovation. We purchased the new building for $1.5 million in July of 2020 and immediately got to work on the renovation with our construction team. When you purchase a property for development, your lender will do an as-is appraisal, meaning they'll determine the value of the asset as it stands now before you do any work to it. They'll also do what's called an as-complete appraisal to look at the theoretical value that you'll create after doing the renovation work that you're proposing. At the time of our purchase, the as-is appraisal came out to $2 million, and the as-complete appraisal was $3 million. With a construction budget of $800,000 and a purchase price of $1.5 million, we are into the building for just $2.3 million, meaning we had $700,000 of equity right off the bat. So not only do we have 7 times our initial equity, we're also generating more than 6 times as much revenue each year, and we're actually netting more than our original equity. We're netting $130,000 per year, and the original investment was just $100,000. Well, that's all for today. Make sure to stay tuned for Questions with Shelby, where she asks more about the power of this deal and the 1031 exchange. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more custom content like this, and we'll see you again real soon. Hey guys, Adam Burns here, and I am with my lovely wife Shelby. Like all of you, she always has lots of questions about real estate. We just got through watching the rough edit of our how I turned a $100,000 investment into a $3 million property, and I think that she has some questions.
Yes, I have a lot of questions for this one.
A lot of questions, okay.
So for the $100,000 that your friend invested, or your business partner, was that pure cash, money in the bank, or does that investment money usually come from a bank loan? What was it in this situation?
So equity or cash invested into a deal has to be just that. It has to be cash coming from somewhere. So that was cash that my friend or my business partner had to invest in the deal.
Okay, so they had that sitting in like a savings account somewhere.
Yes, for all intents and purposes. Yeah, I don't know exactly the nature of the account that he had it in, but yes.
Sure, but that was set aside. Okay, awesome.
What else?
All right, when you put together an operating agreement, do you also make an LLC for each of your business agreements?
Yeah, so the operating agreement is a document that governs how the company acts, and the agreement in place between the two individuals. It is the backbone of the LLC or the company. So you're forming a company, and the company's operating agreement is how the company is supposed to act.
Okay, so you do the LLC first and then the operating agreement.
It doesn't have to be that way. It can be either or.
But you recommend doing both, making sure if you're going to have an operating agreement, you also have the LLC.
Yeah, usually we file the LLC paperwork after the operating agreement is in place, because that's kind of speaks to the company's formation.
Okay, and can you speak to that a little bit more? Like, I'd love to know more about an LLC. Like, is it hard to apply for? How long does that process take? And then do you close it out after the business deal?
I think that's a great question. I think it would be really great material for a future episode, because that's kind of a longer, drawn-out answer that I don't think we necessarily have time for right now. But there's definitely a lot of nuance to it. But to answer kind of your last question, what do you do with the LLC? We open them for an individual property or an individual partnership, and if that is no longer relevant, it does get closed out.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll cover that in a future episode. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, let us know if that's something you guys want to see. All right, so maybe a little bit too personal, but curious to hear, what was the split that was agreed upon for this deal? I'm sure it differs deal by deal, but I'm curious, like, for splits, do you usually set up for the investor, like you'll get 10% of your money back every year? Is there an average? If not, what was it for this deal?
Yeah, so like you kind of hinted at, they do vary deal by deal, and I don't actually remember offhand what this one was, but we typically take anywhere between 35 and 50% of whatever is returned from the deal. So the monthly cash flows or whatever it may be, or for selling condos, whatever the profit is, but it ranges from 35 to usually 50% of the total deal, if we're not putting up any capital of our own.
Is what you get.
Is what we get. If we're putting up capital, then we take more of that other side of the coin, where somebody who's putting up the money is benefiting from the overall work that we're putting in.
Gotcha. So fairly even split, 50% blood, sweat, and tears, 50% if you're just doing the money.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
What else?
All right. So as it relates to capital gains, I have a question that I want to know. For that property that you said you had to roll over into another property, but it fell through, do you have a certain period of time in which to do that to avoid capital gains?
Yeah, so again, I want to be clear, it's not capital gain avoidance, it's capital gain delay. Okay. So you're delaying the capital gains until the sale of the second asset. that can be delayed indefinitely if you're never selling that second asset or it's being moved via another 1031 exchange to a third or fourth or fifth, whatever. But to answer your true question, time. There's definitely a time crunch with a 1031 exchange. You have 45 days after the sale to identify the property that you're going to purchase.
Okay.
So 45 days after you sell the first property, you have to have identified the second property.
Okay.
Within 180 days of the sale of the first property, you need to have made the purchase of the second property.
Okay.
So you have 180 days to complete the 1031 exchange. You only have 45 days or a month and a half to identify and pick your next property.
Okay. But what happens when, like you said, the property fell through? Does that shorten, or do you get another 45 days or an extension?
It doesn't. It
It's
doesn't extend.
45 days.
So yeah, it would have been a really bad situation for us, but fortunately, the way that it all happened worked out. Again, for better or for worse, COVID came into play, and the deadlines were actually extended the year that we were doing this.
Oh, so they were extended in this situation.
Yeah, so 1031 exchange deadlines were extended during COVID.
To how
and
many?
I don't remember the exact extension guidelines because it
Okay.
was so niche and it was for a very short period of time, but the deadlines were extended, so we were able to benefit from those extended deadlines.
Gotcha. Otherwise, say you identified a property, thought everything was well and good, 40 days in, you would have had 5 days to find another property.
Or if you're
potentially.
past that, you could end up having to pay the capital gains.
Wow. Is there any way to apply for, I guess, I don't want to say a variance, or any way to apply for an appeal?
Not really. If you sell a property and then you put the money into, again, this is probably something we can cover in a future episode, but if you go into like an opportunity zone, I don't know if you've heard the speak of opportunity zones,
No. What's an opportunity zone?
but the government has said that there's certain areas that they want economic growth or they want money to be invested for future potential of those areas, rather.
Sure.
They're usually lower income areas or more depressed areas. If you invest in those areas, it acts kind of like a 1031 exchange, where if you invest in those areas and you leave the money there for a certain period of time, I think it's 5 years to have a certain amount of your capital gains forgiven, 7
Okay.
years for more, and then like 10 years for all of it.
Okay.
So there's certain buckets and thresholds, but you could do something like that, buy into an opportunity zone where you can eventually have the capital gains forgiven.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that would have been another way that we could have pivoted if that had happened. But again, there's a lot of material there that we could cover in another episode.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for sharing. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Of course. Any other questions for today?
Nope, that's it. You've answered them all. Thanks, Burns.
You're welcome, Burns.